Disinformation knows no borders, and today the stakes seem higher than ever. Welcome to Truth Talks, a brave new podcast series tackling the challenges of fake news and propaganda head-on. Join us for engaging short conversations with experts from all EU member states and Ukraine as we uncover the truth behind dominant disinformation trends and explore the strategies shaping Europe's fight against manipulation. In this episode, we are zooming in on Czech Republic. Our guest today is Ivan Ruta-Cuker from the Central European Digital Media Observatory, or CEDMO. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Our pleasure, but please, let's start. Tell us, please, what are the dominant narratives and topics that are most frequently targeted by disinformation in Czech Republic?
Well, it's a very broad question because there are two ways to look at it. One is focusing on the disinformative narratives that we found in the public debate. And one is the answer to the question, what disinformative narratives have you encountered, which we every month state in our questionnaire. So I would say that when it comes to the disinformations that we deal with, it's lately mostly focusing on the issues regarding the invasion to Ukraine. But these matters are often highlighted, but are relatively temporary. Something similar would be the COVID pandemic, which lasted, was the main issue amongst the spread of disinformative claims. But now it's not very prominent. A narrative like this would be the issues regarding the Olympic Games, where there were some claims about the female boxer Calouste that were debunked later. This was really prominent, and for many of our citizens and respondents, it was credible, but that faded away. But there are some long-term issues that we encounter that are maybe temporarily less prominent, but in long term, they last. So these issues are, I would say, mainly the issues regarding climate change and also issues regarding the anti-Western agenda. What I mean by that is the claims that are critical but also false about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, about the European Union, and about especially the United States. So these claims are long-lasting, and also obviously issues regarding the domestic politics in the Czech Republic.
Mm-hmm. And about the Olympic Games, is it also somewhere at the bottom a kind of neoconservative agenda here?
We can link it there, but I don't think that people who registered the false claims about the gender of Calouste were just people who are self-proclaimed conservatives or far-right, people who fall under the far-right agenda, but a large part of our society across many groups. So this was just something that hit a lot of buttons at once, but wasn't long-lasting. I don't think many people would remember this issue now.
You mentioned also the monthly questionnaire, and I'd like to ask, who are the target respondents?
Well, the general population, everybody who is 16 years old or older. So
they are being asked what disinformation narratives they are encountering, or?
Yes, we generally focus, our general issue at CEDMO is media literacy. So disinformation is part of that. But we have a long questionnaire. It's a long-term study. We have some questions that are asked periodically, some that are just repeatedly 2 or 3 times a year, and some that are trying to map the current issues. We have the luck to be able to ask this representative sample of Czech population every month, and we can see the long-term developments and trustworthiness and the credibility of some disinformation, and also to see what current events spiked, how large level of interest.
I wanted to ask you also, how salient are these disinformation narratives, meaning also from the other side, how resilient the Czech society is against this disinformation, or generally it falls for the lies?
From our partners, we obtain some prominent disinformation that they encounter circulating the Czech media or social media especially. And then we test if our respondents registered these false claims and to what extent they are credible. And we see that generally in each claim, the credibility is about 10%. But there are some claims that are more prominent and credible. And these usually concern a mixture of issues. That's where the disinformation becomes more credible, when it encompasses more issues, especially when they link the European Union with the environmentalist agenda, issues regarding Green Deal, etc. These are more credible according to Czech population. But then you have some disinformation. The credibility of them is very marginal. For example, that there is some law according to European Union where insects have to be added into flour. This is something that was less credible. Only a small number of people trusted this information. So the variety is huge. And when the credibility reaches about 40%, that's something to be more interested about and more focused on debunking it, and perhaps informing even policymakers, because that is something important. For example, lately we asked respondents regarding a false claim that was actually circulating, that a Polish team of researchers found that carbon dioxide emissions have zero effect on global warming. And we found out that this claim is credible according to 32% of people in the Czech population. That's almost 1/3. That is striking. But also, it's not only about the issues. Maybe it's about a general skepticism when it comes to economical issues. For example, the false claim that the Czech Republic is less economically developed than Bangladesh was credible according to 47% of our respondents. That's almost half of our population.
Probably it was easy to debunk.
It was easy to debunk, but still almost half of our population found this claim credible. So that is a striking number. That is one of the highest number that we ever measured. These claims, when it combines maybe anti-governmental agenda, but also the general air of skepticism in our population, then that's something that makes the false narratives more credible and more widespread.
Fascinating. Okay, now I would like to ask you about the main sources of disinformation, the main actors that produce and stand behind disinformation, like the countries, organizations, politicians. How does it look like?
It's very hard for a person to remember the concrete source of the claim that they encountered. We ask it also every month, and mostly people are not able to find the specific media which they have encountered the disinformation in. So about 1/5. Only about 1/5 of our respondents is aware what the source is and can remember it. And these are claims that they encounter mostly on social media networks, but also in the general mass media. About 1/5 or less. We have it varies in every month, so it's between 12 and 20%. People are able at least to identify the media type of the disinformation they encounter, whether it was some news outlet, whether it was on Facebook, for example, Instagram. That's what they are able to do. And there is some source of disinformative narratives that we investigated upon. It's a little bit of a fun fact, just because we found out that it is not very prominent, but it's still present. And those are chain emails, or the widely forwarded emails. That's something we encountered in the past, before the era of social networking sites, and we thought that this was over. But we found out especially the elderly population is being targeted by this way of communication, and some of them are even forwarding these emails. So it has some mass effect. We found out that about 1/3 of our population is still receiving these chain emails, or these widely forwarded emails. But most of the people don't trust the source, or don't trust the information provided. Only about 12% of this 1/3 of our population is forwarding emails that contain alternative information about political or international issues. That is about 3% of our general population. So it's not very prominent, but there are some social bubbles, especially of elderly people, who perhaps are not very fluent in the use of social networking sites. So this may be the alternative to these communication channels.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the media or how disinformation is being spread, but who stays behind?
When we say disinformation, we often imagine that there is some actor spreading the disinformation, because I think we often tend to think about it in the war context, in the former war propaganda that we know from the Second World War and so on. But generally,
and from the war of Russia on Ukraine nowadays, as part of the hybrid war. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. We see the spread of that, and we see the spread in our country as well. But most of the time, the sources that our respondents cite are the general mass media, because they identify the claim as disinformative according to their views, according how they evaluate the information they receive. So it is problematic to obtain the honest information on, I wouldn't say honest, honest, they are being honest, they understand the claims as disinformative, and perhaps some are, but they don't recognize this information just as something that is fulfilling some agenda. They basically say that it's the same thing as a false claim. Something that is a widespread lies. So I wouldn't say that there is one specific person or organization that spreads this disinformation, because some are fulfilling the agenda regarding domestic politics. These are probably one of the most prominent when it comes to very much targeted disinformation. Mm-hmm. Some are focused on international agenda lately, especially focusing on the Russian invasion to Ukraine. That is true. Some have a different agenda, as I said, anti-Western. I'm generalizing because those are various issues, but we probably can imagine what that encompasses. These are also very prominent and are also spread from relatively smaller or some group of actors, but it's most of the time it's linked to the domestic politic issues.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm looking for you mentioning state actors, like, for example, Russia, China, I don't know, whatever, as is often repeated. Usually such actors don't produce their own narratives, but they use the existing cleavages within countries. Like, for example, the Russian impact on the US elections in the 2016, where Russia was actually promoting disinformation that were both pro-democratic and pro-Republican. So some differences and narratives were already existent, and some sentiments, and it was just, waving it out so that it spreads further. The problem, the misunderstandings, the hatred. So is it the case somehow in Czechia?
Well, there are definitely some cases of the spread of disinformation or just the spread of general confusion regarding public issues that is coming from abroad. But I would say that even the issues and false narratives, disinformation, or generally claims in regards to Russian war in Ukraine are spread by domestic actors who are invested in these issues. We have the specifics of Czech situation. Well, it's maybe not just specific to the Czech Republic, but what we observe here is the polarization of our population according to the situation in Ukraine. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that half of our population is pro-Russia and the other half is pro-Ukraine. That is not the case. About 40% of our population wishes that Ukraine wins the war. About 10% is expressing their support for Russia. The rest is ambiguous. They wouldn't say that they want Ukraine to win all the territories back. They wouldn't say that, on the other hand, they want Russia to get the whole territory of Ukraine. But they would say that they want a peace as soon as possible. And that is probably because our current government is firmly standing behind Ukraine, at least rhetorically. And the opposition is a bit pushed into the situation to counter that, because when they win the same as the government, there are no divides that they would use in their political campaigns. So that is creating many domestic agents have invested in the war in Ukraine, their rhetorics. And also, I would add that focusing on this foreign affair is hiding issues that are relevant to Czech Republic, domestic issues, things regarding the state of the economy, things regarding social justice, etc.
Parliamentary elections are scheduled to be held in Czechia soon, so by October 2025, so this year. Do you see the influence of these elections on the disinformation landscape?
I think we're going to see more of that in the future months. The campaign is especially stark a few months before the election. So I'm prepared to see, I'm prepared to see more of the disinformative narrative circulating. It's going to be much harder to monitor because they will be produced in a much faster pace. Some will resonate more, some less. So the situation will get increasingly more complicated. Also partially because the elections are, I believe, at the beginning of October. So after summer months, when the population is not really focusing on political issues, so it might be harder to register some of the false claims in time. So it would be a challenge to at least try to be a part of the monitoring of the situation and trying to provide Czech population with correct, not debunked, but not false claims, but claims that are true and that are relevant to the debate.
I would like to ask you, in view of what you were saying regarding national versus potential external actors that are spreading disinformation, that all too often we should look more internally for the disturbers. But do you see also some regional or broader transnational disinformation schemes that are working in Czechia? Like something that is bigger than one country?
Well, I think that most of the issues I mentioned are international, especially when we talk about the anti-Western agenda. We see that in many countries, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. And also the issues regarding the Russian invasion to Ukraine are, I think, prominent in many European countries, not just the eastern part of it. So these issues are widespread, and we see that to some extent there are disinformation that reflect that spread. We have some data also from Slovakia and from Poland. We see that some of the disinformative narratives that circulate in the Czech populations are registered by the Slovak and Polish population as well. So we see that the spread is targeting across many European nations. And yes, it's fulfilling the agenda to confuse the general population in Europe, to lose the focus on these issues and lose the understanding of the situation, and therefore not being able to orient ourselves in what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false. So that might be organized from abroad generally. Well, mostly we see the domestic actors. Also, it's partially because when foreign country tries to spread actively their disinformation here, it's really easy to unfold, to find out that it's somebody doing this because, well, there is a language barrier, there is the context barrier, there is the communication stream barrier. We see that perhaps some of these attempts are more successful on group chats applications like Telegraph, Signal, and so on. So maybe WhatsApp to some extent. And these are harder to monitor because you have to be part of the group chat in order to know what has been written there. But also, they do not target such a large population. They perhaps target a small group, which then can spread via other media the claims they heard. And these are then the domestic actors.
And what are the most widespread fake news in circulation at present?
Well, as I said, the most widespread are usually the temporary matters. So recently we asked respondents what is the most common disinformation narrative they registered. And they said that there was some claim of our prime minister that was very medialized. He said that if re-elected, he will assure that within, I think, 4 years, we're going to have the same salaries as in Germany. So that was generally laughed upon, and people identified it as a false claim, as a disinformation. I'm not saying that that's the case, although it's pretty much obvious. But yes, that's probably not.
It can be also defined as wishful thinking.
Yeah, you can say that. Take it until you make it. But that's probably not what you're looking for. And the most prominent issues are in regards to the Ukraine. And to cast the other largest group is in regards to the evaluation of the current government. So people, equal amount of our respondents, relatively equal amount of our respondents say that they encountered disinformation against the current government as the respondents who encountered disinformation supporting the current government. So yeah, there's probably some tacit battle going on among our respondents, perhaps, but that is something they find interesting, and therefore we have to focus on that as well.
Mm-hmm. And how would you define the unique character of the disinformation landscape of Czech Republic?
Well, I think that to some extent it is heavily influenced due to the polarization, because people reflect this polarization in their beliefs. That means they choose a side and they read the information according to what is in favor of this side. Yeah. I heard that the polarization is to some extent everywhere. What is perhaps specific is that it's so closely linked into the political issues, despite the fact that the political arena in Czech Republic is very much scattered. There are so many parties. You have so many parties that adhere especially to the center-right and are either liberal or conservative. You have very few parties that are on the left. You have some parties that are a little bit politically ambiguous. And there are so many cases. And still people often view this situation as polarized, as if there were just two camps fighting each other. That is perhaps a little bit interesting, specific to our terrain. Also, I think that some very important issues that are being discussed in many European countries are untouched or unchallenged in our country. That is especially regarding to the environmental agenda, which is being targeted, but only via specific issues. That is electric vehicles, that may be Green Deal, which in the whole scope of environmental issues are relatively marginal. I'm not saying they are entirely marginal, but they have some influence, but they don't encompass the whole issue of climate change. So that might be a little bit specific. Also, that the divide I described is linked into the invasion of Ukraine. We see that compared to Poland, where the general population is in favor of the Ukrainian defensive efforts, in Czech Republic is more complicated, not because people would support Russia that much, but because they just want to have the war ended at any cost.
A so-called peace camp. Okay, maybe the final question to be constructive, not only, talk about doom and gloom of the situation. What's being done to counter disinformation in Czechia, and what more would you recommend?
Well, there are many approaches to heighten the general media literacy. And I can see the results when I communicate with some of our respondents that are on the younger side, especially because they oftentimes they are educated in these matters. They know how to recognize false information. They know how to verify information. They try to get informed from various sources. So that's something to be enthusiastic about to see. But the problem is, as in our general education system, there's a huge disparity among regions in the Czech Republic. So that pertains to media literacy as well. So it's probably much better shape in the centers, economical centers, such as Prague or Brno, and the situation is definitely worse in some regions, especially in borderlands. So that might be one issue that for our policymakers, especially, but also for the non-governmental sector to target. Other approaches that I would suggest is the cooperation of mass media, of general media outlets, because we know that false information, disinformation spreads on social networking sites much faster than the correct information, than the truth. And often people tend to believe what they heard or read or seen firsthand than something that debunks these claims. It is important to try to spread correct information. And that is also an opportunity for cooperation among media outlets, because the more they try to present the news and what is happening to the general public, more the likelihood that somebody would register the correct information increases.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our conversation about Czech Republic's disinformation landscape. Ivan, thank you so much for these valuable insights.
Yeah, thank you for the interview. It was nice to meet you.
Truth Talk series is part of the project Guardians of Truth, fact-checking during Poland's EU presidency, which is supported by European Media and Information Fund, managed by Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation.